I still remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was sitting at my desk, sipping cold coffee that had been sitting there since yesterday. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've worked at Riverside Marketing for 8 years. 8 years of staying late, fixing problems, and training new people. I thought I knew how things worked here. I thought I understood my boss, Director Thomas Webb, but that Tuesday morning proved me wrong about everything. He called an emergency meeting for the entire senior staff. My stomach twisted when I got the email. In my experience, emergency meetings never bring good news. I looked around at my coworkers, Sarah, who manages client accounts, James, our lead designer, and Michelle, the operations manager. We all had the same worried expression. We gathered in the main conference room at 9 in the morning. Thomas walked in wearing his usual expensive suit, the one he wore when he had something important to announce. He smiled, but it wasn't his real smile. It was the fake one he used when he was about to deliver bad news but wanted to seem friendly about it. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas began, pulling out a chair at the head of the table. He didn't sit down, which made me more nervous. When directors stand during announcements, they're usually about to say something big. As you know, the company has been facing some budget challenges this year. Nothing serious, just the normal ups and downs of business. He paused, looking at each of us one by one. I felt his eyes land on me for just a second too long. I've been working with corporate for the past month to find solutions that don't hurt our team too much. My heart started beating faster. I knew what was coming. In my 8 years at Riverside Marketing, I'd seen this pattern before. They say things like, "Don't hurt too much," right before they cut something important. "We've decided to implement new overtime policies," Thomas continued. He clicked a remote and a slide appeared on the screen behind him. It showed a chart with numbers and percentages. Effective immediately, overtime hours will be cut by 40%. No exceptions, no extensions. The room went completely silent. 40%. That was huge. Most of us relied on overtime to make ends meet. I certainly did. Sarah opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but didn't. Thomas held up his hand before anyone could speak. "I know this is difficult news, but I want to assure you all that this is temporary. Once we stabilize the budget, we'll bring overtime back to normal levels. I promise you that." He said the word promise like it meant something real, like his words carried weight. I had heard Thomas make promises before. Last year, he promised our team a Christmas bonus. It never came. The year before that, he promised we'd get new equipment for the design department. We're still using computers from 2018. But I stayed quiet. I'm not the kind of person who speaks up in meetings. I listen. I observe. I take notes and think about things later. "When will overtime return to normal?" Michelle asked. She had 3 kids at home and relied on overtime checks just like I did. Thomas smiled that fake smile again. "I'd say within 6 months, probably less. The budget issue isn't as bad as it looks. We just need to tighten our belts for a little while." I watched him say this. I noticed how his eyes didn't quite focus on any of us. I noticed how his fingers drummed on the table. These were the signs I'd learned to recognize. Signs that someone wasn't telling the whole truth. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. Thomas walked out first, already on his phone, probably talking to someone in corporate or checking his emails. The rest of us sat there for a moment, not moving. I could see the shock on everyone's faces. Sarah looked pale. James was grinding his teeth. Michelle just stared at the empty slide on the screen. "He promised us," Sarah whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I nodded. "He did." I stood up and started gathering my notes. My mind was already working, already thinking about the implications. 40% fewer overtime hours meant 40% less money for me. I had student loans, I had rent, I had a car payment. The overtime money wasn't extra spending money. It was essential. It was survival. As I walked back to my desk, I made a decision. I would keep careful records of everything. I would document the promises Thomas made. I would track the budget situation. I would observe everything carefully. I didn't know why I felt this need so strongly. I just knew that something wasn't right about this situation. Something felt off, like a note played in the wrong key during a song. I was going to find out what it was. Financial situation. I pulled up the annual reports. I looked at our client list and estimated our revenue. Nothing I found suggested the company was actually in financial trouble. In fact, everything pointed to the opposite. We seemed to be doing well. We'd brought on 3 new major clients in the past year. Our revenue was up. Our reputation in the industry was strong. So why were we cutting overtime? Why was Thomas telling us the budget was struggling when it seemed like it wasn't? That was the question that kept me awake at night. In the 4th week after the cuts, something important happened. Sarah called an informal meeting with me, James, and Michelle. We met at a coffee shop after work, not at the office. This was significant. We never met away from the office. "I've been thinking about something," Sarah said. She looked nervous, like she was about to do something risky. "I think Thomas lied to us. I think the budget situation isn't real." James nodded slowly. "I've been wondering the same thing. The work keeps coming in. If we were really in trouble financially, why would we take on new clients?" Michelle pulled out her phone. "I did some digging," she said. "I looked at our departmental budget records. They're available to operations managers like me. Our department is actually over budget on revenue. We're making money, not losing it." I looked at all 3 of them. "I've been documenting things," I said quietly. "Everything Thomas has said about overtime being temporary. All his promises. The timeline of what he's told us versus what he's told corporate. I think you're all right. I don't think this is about budget at all." The 4 of us sat there in that coffee shop drinking cold coffee and realized we'd all come to the same conclusion. Thomas had lied to us, and we weren't going to just accept it. Over the next week, the 4 of us became a quiet team. We weren't planning anything dramatic or confrontational. We were simply gathering information. Michelle accessed the budget reports she had permission to see and shared what she found. James looked into the actual workload data and showed that we were accomplishing the same amount of work with less pay. Sarah contacted some of our major clients, carefully and professionally, and discovered that they had no idea about our staffing changes. None of them said we'd told them overtime was being cut, which meant Thomas had kept it secret from them. And I continued my documentation. Every email Thomas sent, I saved it. Every meeting where he made statements about the situation, I wrote it down. Every contradiction I noticed between what he said to us and what he said to others, I recorded it. By the end of the week, we had a complete picture. Thomas had cut overtime not because of budget problems, but for some other reason. He'd lied about it being temporary. He'd kept it secret from clients. He'd told corporate he might make it permanent. And he'd done all of this while promising us the situation was temporary and manageable. On Friday afternoon, we met again at the same coffee shop. "What do we do now?" Michelle asked. We all looked at each other. We knew we had to do something. We just weren't sure what. I suggested we talk to corporate directly. Not to get Thomas in trouble, but to get the real story. "We should present what we found," I said. "Not as accusations, but as a request for clarification. We should ask them to explain the situation." Sarah disagreed at first. "If we go to corporate, Thomas will know it was us. He'll retaliate." She was right to worry. In most companies, going over your director's head was dangerous. But James had a different perspective. "He's already lied to us," James said. "He's already broken his promises." "What's he going to do that's worse?" Michelle was quiet, thinking. Then she said, "Marcus, you have all the documentation. You have the evidence. What do you think?" Everyone looked at me. I realized in that moment that I had become the person holding the most complete picture of what had happened. I was the one with the proof. "I think we have to tell someone," I said. "I think we have to tell corporate what we found. But we do it carefully. We do it professionally. We don't accuse. We just present the facts. That Saturday morning, I organized all my documentation into a clear, easy-to-read report. I included charts showing the timeline of promises. I included copies of emails. I included the budget information Michelle had found. I made it look professional, like something a corporate investigator might create. It took me 8 hours. But when I finished, I had something solid, something that couldn't be ignored. Monday morning came and I made the call. I contacted the corporate office and asked to speak with someone in human resources. It took 3 attempts before I got through to a real person. Her name was Lisa Chen, and she worked in corporate HR. That evening, I called my mentor, Derek. Derek used to work at Riverside Marketing 5 years ago, but he moved to a different company. He's always been someone I could trust with the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. "They cut overtime?" he asked when I told him the news. "By how much?" "40%, I replied. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, watching other employees leave for the day. And Thomas said it was temporary. He promised it would be back within 6 months. Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made me think. "Marcus, did he put that promise in writing? Did he send an email or a memo that documented what he said?" I hadn't thought about that. No, he just said it in the meeting. Out loud. Why? "Because promises that aren't in writing aren't really promises," Derek said. "They're just words." And in my experience, when directors make promises out loud but don't document them, they're usually planning to break them. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Derek was right. I had never thought about it that way before. "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything," Derek said. "From this moment forward, write down what Thomas says. Keep emails, save screenshots, create a timeline. If he's lying to you all now, you'll need proof later." After I hung up with Derek, I sat in my car for a long time. I didn't turn on the engine. I just sat there, thinking about what this meant. The next morning, I came to work with a plan. I created a new folder on my computer labeled Overtime Documentation. It seemed simple, maybe even paranoid, but Derek's words had stuck with me. I started by writing down everything I could remember about the meeting. The time it started, the exact words Thomas used, the promises he made, the chart he showed, every detail. Then I opened my email and searched for any previous messages from Thomas about overtime. I found several. One from 6 months ago said, "Overtime is essential to our team's success and will remain a priority." Another from a year ago promised sustainable overtime opportunities for senior staff. I copied these emails into a document and saved them with timestamps. By noon, I had created a detailed record of 3 years of Thomas's promises about overtime. It was quite a file. As I worked, Sarah stopped by my desk. She looked worried. "Have you heard anything else?" she asked. "About the overtime situation?" I shook my head. "Nothing new. Just trying to stay on top of things." She nodded and walked away. I could see the stress in her shoulders. I could see how much this was weighing on her. It was weighing on all of us. That afternoon, I got an email from Thomas. The subject line said, "Overtime Policy, Implementation Update." My heart jumped. Was he already reversing the cuts? I opened it quickly. But it wasn't good news. It was an email informing us that the overtime cuts would go into effect immediately, effective that very day. No transition period, no warning, just done. The week after the cuts went into effect was chaos. Everyone's workload stayed the same, but we had 40% fewer hours to complete it. Projects started falling behind. Client deadlines got pushed back. Sarah missed her daughter's soccer game because she couldn't leave the office. James had to work through the weekend to finish a campaign. Michelle started looking exhausted all the time. I watched all of this happen. I documented it. I took notes about which projects were delayed and why. I recorded how many hours each person was actually working, even though they could only bill 40% of that time. I was building a case, even though I wasn't quite sure what case I was building or who I would present it to. One day, about 2 weeks after the cut started, I overheard Thomas on the phone in his office. His door was open, and his voice carried down the hallway. "Yes, I understand the board is happy with the cost reduction," he was saying. "No, I haven't told them that it's temporary. Actually, I'm thinking we might extend this policy. The team is managing okay with less hours." My chest went cold. He was lying. He was telling corporate that the cuts were permanent, maybe even planning to make them permanent, while telling us they were temporary. That was the moment I knew Derek had been right. Thomas wasn't being honest with any of us. I expanded my documentation project that night. I created a detailed timeline on my personal laptop at home, away from the office. I wrote down everything I knew. When each promise was made, what exactly was promised, what was actually happening, and what Thomas was telling corporate. I included dates, times, and direct quotes. I was careful to only write down things I could prove. I didn't include opinions or feelings, just facts, just evidence. I also started paying closer attention to the company budget. I searched for any public information I could find about Riverside marketing.
Part of me understood his anger. From his perspective, I had helped take away his job. But from my perspective, he had lied to us. He had broken his promises. He had left me no choice but to report him. After 2 weeks, a new director was assigned to our office. Her name was Patricia Moore, and she was nothing like Thomas. She called a meeting on her first day. She stood in front of us and said something Thomas never would have said. "I know there's been a difficult situation here," she said. "I want you to know that I've reviewed everything that happened, and I believe the people who reported the previous director did the right thing." That took courage. She looked directly at me when she said that. "I'm going to rebuild trust in this office. I'm going to make sure that what happened doesn't happen again. And I want to personally thank Marcus for his documentation and his willingness to speak up." I felt my face turn red. Everyone was looking at me. Sarah squeezed my arm under the table. Patricia continued by announcing that not only would overtime remain, but there would be additional bonuses for everyone who had suffered through the cuts. She also announced new policies to make sure management was transparent about budget issues. She had clearly spent time understanding what had happened and thinking about how to fix it. The overtime was restored, and our paychecks went back to normal. The additional bonus Patricia promised came through. But more importantly, the office culture changed. People started speaking up more. People started trusting management. People realized that there could be consequences for dishonesty, but also that there could be support for speaking the truth. I got promoted. Patricia asked me to help develop new transparency policies for the office. I became the person who trained new managers on ethical behavior. My role changed from just doing my job to helping shape how the company operated. I never expected any of this when I started keeping that first document on my computer. I never thought that paying attention and documenting things carefully would lead to this. But that's what happened. 6 months later, I got a call from Lisa Chen at corporate. She told me that, based on my actions, I was being considered for a new position, a position in corporate HR, helping other offices identify and address management problems. The job would include a significant salary increase and the opportunity to work across multiple locations. I accepted without hesitation. My last day at the local office was emotional. The entire team threw me a going-away party. Sarah gave a speech about how I'd always been quiet, but how that quietness had hidden strength. James joked that I was the document master. Michelle thanked me for standing up for all of them. Even Patricia came to the party and gave me a recommendation letter that was 2 pages long. As I left that office for the last time as a regular employee, I felt like I'd grown into someone new. I was still quiet. I still preferred listening to talking. But I'd learned that quiet could be powerful. Quiet could be brave. Looking back now, I realized that the key to everything was paying attention. Thomas made his promises, but I documented them. He made his contradictions, but I noticed them. He lied to corporate, but I kept records. While other people just accepted the situation, I asked questions. While other people just went along, I gathered information. I didn't set out to take down my boss. I just wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to know the truth. And when I found it, I felt obligated to share it. The publicity, the interviews, the new job, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that I had done the right thing. Sarah, James, and Michelle and I still grab coffee sometimes. We still talk about that period like it was a crazy dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. It was a moment when ordinary people chose to stand up for something that mattered. We chose to tell the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was powerful enough to change everything, which meant the overtime cuts were suspended. They were being reversed. I looked around the office to see if others were reading the same email. Sarah had her hand over her mouth. James was shaking his head in disbelief. Michelle's eyes were wide. Within minutes, we got a call from corporate. Lisa Chen wanted to meet with Thomas immediately. We watched as Thomas was called into a video conference call. We couldn't hear what was being said, but we could see his face through his office window. His expression changed from confusion to shock to anger. After 30 minutes, the call ended, and Thomas came out of his office. He didn't look at any of us. He just walked straight to his car and left for the day. By the end of business that day, we had official confirmation. The overtime cuts were reversed. We would be paid for our hours again. The next week was strange and tense. Thomas came back to the office, but something had changed. He was different. He didn't make jokes. He didn't walk around confidently. He seemed smaller somehow, like the energy had been drained out of him. None of us said anything about what had happened. We didn't tell him we'd gone to corporate. We just did our jobs. But we noticed everything. We noticed that corporate was in the office more often. We noticed that there were more meetings with Thomas behind closed doors. We noticed that the energy in the office had shifted. On Friday of that week, we got another email from corporate. It was a company-wide announcement. Thomas Webb had decided to step down from his position as director. The email said he was pursuing other opportunities and that a new director would be assigned within 2 weeks. There was no explanation of why he was leaving, no mention of the investigation, nothing that would tell anyone outside what had really happened. But we knew. The four of us knew exactly what had happened, and we knew that everyone else would figure it out eventually. Within 3 days, the story leaked. I'm not sure who told the media, but suddenly there were articles about our office. Local business blogs were writing about mismanagement at Riverside Marketing and director forced to resign after breaking promises to staff. News outlets picked it up. By Monday of the next week, it was on local television. Marketing director resigns after investigation into overtime policy, read the headline. The story didn't give all the details, but it gave enough. It talked about promises being broken. It talked about how overtime was cut and then restored. It talked about how corporate had to step in. And it mentioned that the investigation was led by employees who reported the problem. That was when my name started being mentioned. Someone in the office must have told reporters that I was the one who documented everything. Suddenly, I was getting phone calls. Journalists wanted to interview me. They wanted to know my side of the story. I was nervous about talking to them. I didn't want to be the face of this situation, but Derek called me and told me I should do it. "You did the right thing," he said. "People should know that. People should know that you stood up for what was right." I agreed to do one interview with a local news station. It aired on Wednesday evening. I sat across from a reporter named Michelle Johnson, and I told the whole story. I talked about the promises Thomas had made. I talked about keeping documentation. I talked about going to corporate. I talked about how the four of us worked together to uncover the truth. I didn't say mean things about Thomas. I just told the facts. I told the truth. The interview was 5 minutes long, but those 5 minutes changed everything. That night, my phone started blowing up. Friends and coworkers were texting me. My email inbox was filling up with messages. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. People were sharing it on social media. Business websites were republishing the news. I was being called the employee who stood up to corporate corruption and the whistleblower who exposed mismanagement. I didn't feel like a whistleblower. I felt like someone who had just been paying attention. The attention was both amazing and overwhelming. People who had been treated unfairly by their own bosses started reaching out to me. They asked for advice on how to document problems. They asked how to report issues to corporate. They asked if they could tell their own stories. News outlets wanted to interview me again. Online communities started discussing my story. And through it all, something unexpected happened. I became someone people trusted. I became someone people saw as brave. But I also became someone Thomas resented. He didn't say it directly, but I heard through other employees that he was blaming me for his resignation. He was telling people that I had betrayed him, that I had gone behind his back, that I had set him up. Have some concerns about how a policy was implemented at our location, I told her carefully. I'd like to present some information to someone who can look into it. Lisa asked me to send her an email with a summary. I did. I sent her a brief overview of the situation and asked if we could schedule a time to discuss it. By Tuesday, Lisa had replied, she wanted to set up a meeting, not with just me, but with all four of us, me, Sarah, James, and Michelle. She was taking this seriously. On Wednesday, we got a call from the corporate office. Lisa wanted to meet with us the next day, in person, at the corporate headquarters about an hour away from our office. Our hearts were racing. We were actually doing this. We were actually going to report our director to corporate. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what could happen. Would Thomas find out before the meeting? Would he try to stop us? Would corporate believe us? Would we lose our jobs? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through 1,000 different scenarios. At 6 a.m, I gave up on sleep and got up. I made a strong cup of coffee and reviewed my documentation one more time. Everything was in order. Everything was factual. Everything could be proven. I printed out extra copies of everything and put them in a folder. By 7, I was getting ready to meet Sarah, James, and Michelle at the coffee shop. We decided to drive together to the corporate office. We didn't want to show up separately. We wanted to be united. When I got to the coffee shop, they were already there, sitting at the same table we'd met at before. None of them looked like they'd slept either. Sarah had dark circles under her eyes. James kept tapping his fingers on the table. Michelle was twisting her napkin into shapes. "Are we doing the right thing?" Sarah asked as I sat down. It was the question we were all thinking. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know that what Thomas did was wrong. And I know that we have proof. I think we have to try." We finished our coffee in silence. Then we drove to corporate headquarters together. The corporate office was nothing like our local office. It was modern and sleek, with big windows and polished floors. We sat in a waiting area for about 10 minutes before Lisa Chen came out to greet us. She was professional but friendly. She didn't smile, but she also didn't frown. She just looked at us with a thoughtful expression. "Thank you for coming in," she said. "I know this isn't easy. We take all concerns seriously here." She led us to a conference room. It was much nicer than the one at our office. Lisa sat across from us with a laptop and a notepad. "Why don't you start by telling me what's been happening?" she said, looking at me. I realized everyone expected me to go first, so I did. I explained everything clearly and calmly. I talked about the promises Thomas made. I talked about the documentation I'd kept. I talked about the contradiction between what he told us and what he told corporate. I presented the financial information Michelle had found. The whole explanation took about 30 minutes. When I finished, Lisa just nodded. She didn't react with shock or anger. She just nodded like she was confirming something she already suspected. "Do you have evidence of all this?" Lisa asked. I slid the folder across the table. She opened it and started looking through the documents carefully. She read each email. She looked at the timeline. She examined the budget reports. She didn't rush. She took her time and really studied everything. After about 10 minutes, she looked up. "This is very thorough," she said. "Marcus, did you compile all of this?" I nodded. I started keeping records after the initial announcement. I wanted to make sure I had proof of what was said. Lisa looked at Sarah, James, and Michelle. And all of you can confirm what Marcus is saying. You all agree that Director Webb promised this was temporary? They all nodded. One by one, they confirmed everything I'd said. Lisa closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. I appreciate you bringing this to me. I need you to know that this is going to trigger an investigation. There will be consequences. Are you prepared for that? We looked at each other. Yes, I said, we're prepared. Lisa nodded. Good. Because this pattern of behavior is serious, and it's not the first time we've heard concerns about Director Webb. 2 days later, I was at my desk when I noticed something unusual. There was an all-staff email from corporate. It was addressed to our entire office location, and the subject line said, Policy Review, Immediate Effect. My heart started beating faster. I opened it and read it carefully. The email said that corporate had decided to review all personnel policies implemented in the past month. It said that any policy changes would be temporarily suspended pending the outcome of the review.